And then I am going to politely mute myself and pass it on to Bob.
Great. Thank you, Jody and Josie. As some of you know, this is our third Camaraderie in Conversation. This was the brainchild of Josie and Jody as we were trying to figure out ways to virtually connect. So I want to thank the two of you for having this great vision. And I know they've committed to, as past president, continuing this on for the next 2 years. So thank you very much for that. I'm excited because I get to become the NATA president-elect. So I'm looking forward to that next part of my journey. We are really, really lucky to have a wonderful speaker with us tonight in Dr. Trina Harlow. I've known Dr. Harlow for a number of years, but I really got to know her about a little over 3 months ago when she put out a call.
Yeah.
And the call was just as schools were starting to close. And so a lot has happened, both professionally as well as personally to Dr. Harlow in the last 3 months. And I'm sure she's going to share a little bit of that, but it is my distinct pleasure to introduce my friend, my colleague, just all around really amazing human being, Dr. Trina Harlow. Welcome.
Thank you. I think you're too kind, but thank you. I just want to say how excited I am to be here with you tonight. We do live in some, I think somebody might need to mute themselves. I'm not sure who that is. We live in some strange times, and I think just admitting it and stating it just helps us figure out how to navigate through it professionally. I learned a long time ago that you just have to acknowledge the elephant in the room. You know, if you want to do something about it, you have to acknowledge that big old elephant. And I think, you know, during the last few months, we have faced a known villain, this virus, and then we are also facing simultaneously with this known villain of the virus, we're now facing some very difficult issues for our country of systemic racism and racial equality, and a lot's going on in our country, and therefore a lot's going on for us as teachers. And I think that one thing that's really pretty clear to me is that our normal structures of art education are just going to have to change. Even if we beat this virus, which I know we will eventually when we get this vaccine, I think that what was normal for us is probably going to be different. And I think that we can embrace the change. I know for me personally, I learned so much the last 3 months, and I'm a pretty tech savvy person. I've had a lot of training and done a lot of things in my professional career that required me to be tech savvy. But I've learned some really cool things these last few months that I plan to include in my my practice. So I think our normal structures are going to shift and change a little bit, and I think that we can embrace the change, and I think we're going to kind of reinvent a new kind of art education. And I'm going to skip that because Bob introduced me. For those of you, could you just wave at me if you were at our conference today? Couple of you. Wait, I need to switch this so I see more of you. Keep waving. Okay, a few of you. Great, great. Well, Bob and I are kind of on a high because yesterday and today were absolutely amazing. And if you get a chance, you can go to our website, which is right here. It's onlineartteachers.com, or you can go to our Facebook page and you can view the videos. We've archived them of all the session speakers. And our whole goal for this conference was to provide really meaningful sessions. I said real resources for real teachers for real times. So you can go look at those and view them. And I have to tell you, back to back to back to back, it is some of the best professional development as far as curricular resources I've seen in a long time. So please go take a look at those things and join our group if you're not a member of it. We'd love for you to. Oh, what did I just do? Sorry. There we go. Okay, so I'm going to breeze through just a few things real quickly. because we have a certain amount of time tonight, and I really want to get to something a little more important, I think, down the road. But to set the stage, we've been through this period of great curricular choices and changes that we had to make. And you know what that is because you had to do it. And we had to learn how to communicate differently with our students. We had to differentiate our communication, just like we differentiate our instruction. We had to differentiate our communication. We could connect with some students through school software and online and on their computers, and some we had to have packet pickups and they had to get papers, and some schools delivered packets to schools where students didn't have access to any kind of technology. One thing that I'm never going to forget is early on in March, I put out an offer to mentor or help teachers across the country that needed it. And a teacher from New Mexico that I met with was almost crying at the beginning of our session. And she didn't even have a computer. And the school had no computer to give her. She had her cell phone. And she lived in a rural area in New Mexico. And she looked me in the eye in that Zoom session and literally said she had no idea how to contact any of her students. And I also talked to a teacher up in Michigan that lived in a remote area, and they have no internet in the whole area. This teacher was having to drive into town to someplace with public Wi-Fi, and he could sit outside at the building and get Wi-Fi. And I talked to a parent in Iowa that by the end of April still had not heard from their school at all. And then we have these wonderful stories of schools making AT&T hotspots on buses, and you saw everything going on. I don't need to spend much time talking about that. But so we learned that we had to differentiate communication. And assessment to me is the phenomenon of this whole ordeal, because it was the biggest. We all helped each other get curriculum figured out. And as a school unit, we figured out how to do our communication. But then reality hit us hard, and it was 30, 40, 50, sometimes 70% of students weren't communicating with us. They weren't logging in, they weren't checking things off, they weren't submitting things, they just weren't doing anything. And teachers didn't know how to handle that. And so assessment became the big conversation. What am I doing? What can I do? How can I get students to turn things in? And it really became, it was always talked about on our Facebook page. And I truly consider assessment to be the phenomenon of COVID-19 for American education and world education. And the thing that I think we have to remember, though, is that during normal times, students don't turn in work. And during normal times, we have chronic absenteeism. So we can't expect to have stellar performance coming from students' living rooms or their bedrooms or wherever they are trying to do their work from home. And, let's add to that the inequities that existed of devices and internet and family help. There's all kinds of reasons students didn't have family help. So, one thing that I did notice, though, and I don't want to step on any toes here, because what we're going to talk about in a little bit is motivation. And this is kind of a lead in to that. But one thing I did notice is that teachers who were kind of being peppy and positive and zippy kind of came easy for them, they were having a little better luck. And I don't want to step on any toes, I really don't, but I teach future art teachers. And one of the things that I place so much emphasis on teaching my future art teachers, think back to your art ed programs in college, I teach them how to reflect. It's no good for me to go out and do an observation on them. and not ask them to reflect. They don't want to just hear me tell them everything they need to do a little different, or I would change this or I would do that. So I think that we have to reflect. We've got to really put a hard lens on ourselves as we plan for fall. What went well? What could I have done better? And I just think that is going to be so massively important. I want to challenge you with this thought today. Before we can plan more effective remote instruction or blended instruction with our students, we are going, as teachers, we're going to have to develop more compassion and empathy than we've ever had with our students. I've never been a betting person, but I'm going to kind of step out on a limb here, and I'm going to say that I think a lot's going to change between now and August, and let's just see how many of us are really face-to-face in August. I have decided that I'm planning for 100% remote. I can easily adapt that to blended, and if I'm face-to-face, I know how to do that. So I'm going to spend my summer planning as if my instruction is remote, because I don't want to get caught I don't want to show back up for 2 weeks of class in August and the social distancing protocol we put in place in school is a disaster. And I don't know if you saw what happened in Beijing last week, but a couple weeks ago, Beijing schools went back to school. And last week, one night, teachers in Beijing literally got a message, don't come to school tomorrow. Literally with no notice overnight, they went right back to 100% remote instruction. I think unless we have the miracle virus show up, that's what I'm going to do. And I would encourage you to do that, because you know how to teach face-to-face. And anything we plan for remote, we can easily pull out pieces and parts of it for it to be blended. So empathy and compassion. When I was getting my master's degree, I'm just going to be honest, I got crossways a little bit with a professor that told me that I could not teach children how to have empathy, that empathy is something we're born with. She said it was innate. Empathy is, let me give you an example. So compassion is someone tells you that Bob Reeker loves Mexican food and he hasn't had any in about a month, and you go by the Mexican food place and you drop it off and knock on his door and drop it off and leave. That's compassion, okay? You know Bob is really having a hard time because he needs Mexican food, and so you compassionately provide some for him. Empathy is no one had to tell you Bob wanted some Mexican food. You just knew Bob well enough to know. You'd spent so much time with Bob that you and he went out to eat Mexican food every week. You hadn't seen him in 2 months, and you knew he had to be missing Mexican food. So you picked some up and dropped it off. That's empathy. They're really two different things. And so we have to develop, I truly believe, more compassion for our students. And I think one of the things that we did on K-12 that I am really kind of proud of is I feel like we all became therapists for each other. And we would have a teacher bottom out and say, none of my students are responding to me, none of my students are turning in work. And early on, we have a teacher in their normal mindset get upset with a student and kind of lash out at their students. And before I could even post anything, there would be 249 posts of teachers telling them, you know, oh, but think about this or think about that, or these are hard times, you don't know what's going on in their home, you know, different things. So I think that the first thing we've got to do is get all our ducks in a row, get our curricular plans made, get our communication figured out, because those things are essential and critical. And then we've got to reach up here and put on these hats that we're going to wear that are loaded with compassion and empathy. I grew up in I went to a 2-room schoolhouse in Western Kansas growing up, and my teacher taught my mom, and she walked around with a ruler, and you had to hold out your hands and she smacked you on the hand. Never happened to me, but Ricky Henry sat next to me. He got his hand smacked all the time. You know, those days are over. And I think we're going to talk a little bit about this at the end, but I am certain regardless of how we teach, remote, blended, or face-to-face, I am certain that we are going to have students who are dealing with anxiety they didn't have before all this started. We're probably going to have some colleagues that are dealing with anxiety they may not have had before all this started. So I want to talk to you about intrinsic motivation and self-efficacy, because these are two things that are critical to our teaching. So I guess the thought is, how can we expect students who did not pay attention in class with us right there to watch over them and keep them going, how can we expect them to be motivated while they're sitting at home in their pajamas or on the sofa or on the floor with their dog or laying in their bed? I had so many Zoom sessions with college students from their bed. I finally said no more bed meetings. But our planning for fall, it just can't be what we want. It's got to be what they need. I'm going to say that one more time. I think our planning for fall can't be what we want. It's got to be what they need. And so we're going to talk very quickly about intrinsic motivation and self-efficacy. So intrinsic motivation means that your students naturally have motivation. So right now, I want you all to picture in your mind, right now, picture a student in your mind that you had in class last fall, a student that was always motivated, always doing things, you know, just self-motivated all the time. I'm gonna be quiet for a few seconds. I really want you to think of that student. Picture them in your mind. I'm curious, if you had that student these last couple months in class, I'm curious how that student did. Did anyone have the same student in the fall and the spring, and could you share how that highly motivated student handled the transition from face-to-face to remote? I don't want to put anybody on the spot because you may not have even had the same students. Okay. Yes.
I did art office hours. So we would do an hour of drawing every week.
Yes.
And I kept trying to get the number to go up, but you know, I was getting like 10. But I felt like I was preaching to the choir, because it was these families that had 2 kids, and they would show up together, and because they were together, it seemed like they were doing good. I had a couple of singles, but these were definitely the ones that I hadn't really even had a chance to notice in the fall, because,
okay,
you know, I was too busy fighting fires.
How many of you had some students? This is a trend we saw. How many of you had some students that never engaged in your classroom, and lo and behold, you know, in the here and now, they were so plugged in. You couldn't get over a change you saw in a student. Anybody have a student like that in this group? Bob did? Yes. Jody? Okay. That's really interesting, and I think we're going to have to look into that, because one thing that's just really blaring to me is that there were a lot of teachers saying students that weren't plugged in at all in their classroom were plugged in remote, and there's a lot of reasons for that, and that's a whole nother session that we could talk about. But so intrinsic motivation means that your students have naturally have motivation, and how they have intrinsic motivation in our classroom doesn't necessarily transfer to intrinsic motivation at home, because there's reasons that students have intrinsic motivation. They're self-motivated naturally, but guess what? They might be motivated by you walking by and putting your hand on their shoulder and saying, good job. Or they might be motivated by just wanting to please you in person, seeing the expression on your face and being, you know, close to you and same proximity as you. There's a lot of things that drive intrinsically motivated students. I think it's really important. We're not going to be able to teach to the students with intrinsic motivation. We're going to need to teach to the students without it. And self-efficacy is when students are able to get things done more so on their own, or they can at least attempt to guide their learning, and they can stay more on task with their expectations. But many students don't have those skills. And so how do we teach them? I am convinced that it's got to start with us. We've got to go back to that thought from earlier that we've got to teach what they need and not what we want. And I think this is the hardest hurdle for some of us to jump, because we have this mindset that, by golly, my students are going to do what I want them to do. And we've got to let go of that balloon, I think, in remote instruction. So I highly recommend that you seek out some ways that you can provide fantastic motivation to your students that is conveys well, transfers well to the remote setting. So what we've got to do is simple. We've got to provide engaging curriculum. It's got to be timely. It's got to be relevant to our students' worlds. It's got to hold their attention, and we've got to give them ownership. And we've got to do all this while incorporating our standards. And I'm not going to spend much time talking about instructional plans tonight, because I think you know how to do that. I think you've had some good experience with that. But right now, I do want you to think of one instructional lesson or practice that you did in your brick and mortar classroom that's always a huge success. And you don't have to write it in the chat box, but I want you to just think about it. Think of a project. We all have this favorite project we love that we do every year because it turns out well and we like it and students like it. So I want you to think of a project that you loved and your students loved. And I want you to think for a minute if you were able to do that same project in remote instruction. And if you were able to, would you unmute yourself and tell us just briefly what that project was? Silence. Sometimes silence is not golden. I've asked this question a good bit, and the answers are things that have to do with fiber arts and metals and paper mache and building things. And I realize that teachers really miss the tactile, hands-on making, and so that right there says, what does that say to you? What does it say? If your favorite projects didn't translate well to remote instruction, it says we've got to come up with different projects, right? And I really encourage you to go watch those sessions from our conference yesterday and today, because they were all made for remote instruction. And you will have, my head spinning. I have so many ideas. I'm going to incorporate them at the university I'm going to be working at. But we've got to kind of change what we're doing, but yet it's got to be exciting and it's got to hold students' attention. So let's talk for just a minute, and I'm going to have you all, I really do want to hear from a few of you on this one. So you can just kind of unmute yourself when you want to answer. But so we've already thought of a lesson or a practice that we did that we thought was engaging. And so I want you to think now of a way that you offered motivation, and I'll say rewards of some kind in your face-to-face brick and mortar classroom. What was something you always did to motivate students? Who wants to just quickly share some things?
I'll share.
Okay.
With my elementary kids, it's just the words I say when I'm.
Okay.
I have a tab room, and so I really focus on the traits, and I just, by walking around and say, wow, look at you, envision your idea. And pretty soon I noticed kids were like sketching out more and drawing out a plan and then trying to build it. And then I'd really praise, look at you, you're a brave artist, stuff like that.
You're developing relationships with your students, and you're using positive reinforcement, right?
Oh, yeah.
You say, okay, I think I know the answer to this, but could you do that in remote instruction? Were you able to do
it's
that?
more of a challenge.
Okay.
A little bit, because our school did not require the elementary art students to do the projects, but I had a lot of them do it just because of the way I set it up that they wanted to. The ones that could. I mean, there's some that obviously couldn't access things. Hopefully we'll be more organized as a school.
Okay.
Just come. Oh.
Anyone else want to share something you did in your face-to-face classroom to motivate students?
Something I always do in face-to-face classroom is we'll start off the semester or quarter with the why and the how we're going to do it. And then eventually kids get to learn more about what it is we'll be doing. But starting with the why we're doing what we're doing and the bigger scope of why art education is important in their lives, and that we work with themes so that every student can find it real and relatable to their personal interests, helps to make it engaging for them. That it doesn't matter if you don't like making art, if you love math, we're going to make that part of your experience in here.
And were you able to transfer that to remote instruction?
Not in the way that we did it as a district, no.
Okay.
I think it's possible.
I think so too. I think it's all possible, actually, I think. Who else? Someone else want to share something that you did?
This doesn't really go with instruction. However, the students missed being together. They missed each other. It wasn't necessarily me or they missed the classroom, but they missed each other. And that was motivating for them to get on and to participate and to join the live classroom session, because finally I get to see everybody and talk to everybody again. We get to hang out again like we did before. So,
you know, one thing
for that, you have to allow for that. You have to allow for them to be able to say, oh, here's my cat on screen, and it's part of the art lesson that day. Oh, well, you know, they needed to stay connected with each other in that way. I felt it was really important to do that.
I think that was one of the hardest things for kids. And I know that over and over again, I was telling teachers, they've all got cell phones. Divide them into groups on assignments and, you know, share phone numbers, 3 kids, 4 kids in a group, and they can all text each other and work together because they're used to that. They're used to that. So that was a way I think we could probably do more of that digital collaboration with our students. Okay, so what I'm thinking of is, like, for instance, when I was an elementary school teacher, I had a party book. And in order, my classes, I had 1,250 students a week in a Dallas suburb come through my classroom in 30-minute art classes. And I didn't want to have set up and clean up class. I wanted to have art. So it was a well orchestrated symphony, that art class was. And I didn't want to spend all my time dealing with, you know, students that were horsing around or behavior, whatever. And most kids love coming to art. In elementary school, I noticed what I dealt with wasn't misbehavior. It was sometimes they were so awfully excited that it was art day that translated into a lot of chatter and movement and things. And so I had a party book, and if they were really getting off task after a couple of warnings, or, you know, me walking by and bending over and talking to them quietly or tapping them on the shoulder or something, I would have them go sign their name in the party book. And at the end of the semester, if your name was not in the party book 3 times, you got to have an art party. And so the students whose names were in the party book went to the music room or the Spanish room, went to one of the other specials teachers. I'm kind of thinking along those lines, you know, and when I was a middle school and high school teacher, I did things there too. I'm a big believer in motivating. I'm also a big believer in making students work. I have a real strong work ethic, and I convey that to my students. But I love rewarding good effort. And so I think one thing we've got to do is we've got to think about, how does this motivation transfer? If we want to create, if we want students, we want to teach to the students who don't have intrinsic motivation and self-efficacy, how can we motivate those students? So obviously we can motivate them with grades, right? I mean, it's amazing how many students will do something for a grade. And while we all thought that assessment was the phenomenon of COVID-19 social distancing education, the night before grades were due, teachers were reporting all over social media that students were dumping in assignments they hadn't done the whole 2.5 months. We can think of rewards. One of our sessions today was on mundane merit badges, you know, making funky, cool, fun badges, digital badges that you give to students. They love that. That engagement thing we've already talked about. And also, I think this is just an example I gave, but if you have a lesson that you had a hard time getting students to stay engaged with in your face-to-face classroom, they're not going to be engaged in it in remote instruction. So forget those curricular units. One thing in my own practice that I noticed is the online gallery discussion boards, using a discussion board. I use Canvas. Canvas has a discussion board. I turned it into an online gallery. And every week students had to share some of their work in the discussion board post. And I noticed, y'all, this to me is key. I noticed that when they shared it, when they turned in an assignment just to me, the quality wasn't so great. It was just like, get her done, check it off, get it done. But when they had to post it publicly in the discussion board for their peers to see, I could not get over the quality of the work and how wonderful it was. So I'd like to ask you all to really think about ways that you can ask your students in remote instruction to share their work publicly within the class. Contests. You can have all kinds of contests. I heard a teacher today say that she had a pizza contest and she was having students not get involved and she was struggling with that. And so she came up with this pizza contest idea and she delivered a pizza to someone's house. So have some contests. Teachers were dropping off goodie bags at houses. Now, that might work in Nebraska. If you live in the Bronx in New York City, I don't know that you can do that because you may not even know where all your students live or be able to find them. But have some fun contests. I think variety is what they need. I know that when I take an online course as a grad student, like with my master's degree or doctoral program, when the teacher was so structured that every week was exactly the same, it gets kind of redundant and boring. But throw in a surprise every week. Maybe you have the normal things every week, but throw in a surprise every week. Publicity. We had one of our presenters at the conference is doing a great newsletter for her students, and a digital newsletter. And maybe your principal would do a newsletter where they feature students' work, you know, kind of a shout out to students that were really plugging in. We had teachers doing digital certificates for great online participation. Call your town newspaper, your TV station, the radio station, give a shout out to a student that did really good. So if we do all these things, if we know that the students with self-efficacy and intrinsic motivation in our classroom, we check on them, we see how they're doing in remote instruction from home, and we might have to tweak how we teach. We add things to create motivation and excitement, enthusiasm, and take away the boring part of sitting here staring at a computer screen. I mean, we've all been doing it now for months and it's getting old. It's getting old. I just want to be in a room with people. I want to hear people laugh. I want to see someone sad. I want to be in a room with people expressing emotion. I think if we can do all these things, we'll start developing what I call the thinking learner. And we're going to talk about that just briefly. And I'm keeping an eye on the time. So the thinking learner, to me, what is the thinking learner? Let me back up and say I have pondered and pondered and pondered this phenomenon of so many students not turning in work. And I've come to the conclusion that there's kind of three main reasons for it. There's probably a lot of reasons, but three really stood out to me. One was the inequity of available devices and internet service. That's just a given. That made it hard for a lot of students. And we've already talked about the fact that some students just don't have self-efficacy and intrinsic motivation. And then thirdly, I think we've got to put that mirror on us. We've already talked about that reflection component. You know, maybe our instructional planning needs to be tweaked a little bit. Maybe it needs to be a little more engaging. Maybe we need to provide more motivation in it for this remote world we're all living in these days. I want to read this to you. A little boy wrote this, and this is real, and some of you may have seen this floating around social media. Ben, and it was March 16th, so he had only been social distancing a few days. It's not going good. My mom's getting stressed out. My mom is really getting confused. We took a break so my mom can figure this stuff out, and I'm telling you, it is not going good. So we had these parents that were not teachers that were being asked to be teachers. And we're going to talk just briefly about the characteristics of the thinking learner. And I'm just gonna speak from my heart for a minute here. Our schools have been way too dependent on standardized test taking. And we art teachers know that. We might be the only teachers in the building that know that there's a better way to learn. The other teachers might just think there's a better way to work because so much pressure is put on them for standardized teaching. But we know that there's a better way to learn. We have been creating memorizers and doers and checker offers. We have not been growing thinkers in our schools. I tried an experiment at Kansas State University, and I had a project where students had total and complete freedom one semester. And do you know, they just, I'm going to kind of use some cliche language here, they freaked out. They wanted to know exactly what I wanted them to do and how I wanted them to do it and the criteria and what was expected. And I was literally giving them total freedom to come up with a teaching unit, and just the sky was the limit. And so I spent that semester working with those students, helping them understand that teaching and learning is about so much more than checking off a list and just meeting criteria. So I'm convinced that we can achieve this step by step, Zoom by Zoom, supply packet by supply packet. I'm convinced that we can create thinking learners, and I think it's going to be slow, and I think we're going to have a lot of patience for that. We're going to have to let them struggle, and very quickly, I'm going to buzz through these. I think that these are 5 characteristics that if we as teachers have the patience to create thinking learners, I think we're going to end up with students that are more excited to learn. And one way this is some curriculum from our K-12 group, these Bitmoji virtual classrooms. This was a pet disguise art challenge, and students love disguising their pets and doing an art project around that. They're going to be excited by this motivation they feel inside them. The toy photography unit was amazing. So many teachers were doing that because toys were in a lot of the homes. And so they came up with these photography assignments that were wonderful. And a lot of you saw the found object color wheels that everyone was doing. Well, this teacher took it to a new level, and you can see this video on our Facebook group page. But when you play this video, she is changing the colors of her, she's changing outfits, and she spliced and stitched all of these video clips together into one. And she is the human color wheel. Thinking learners are more excited to problem solve. And if you aren't familiar with the Genius Hour and the Launch Project, write that down and Google it. Genius Hour and the Launch Project. I'll focus on Genius Hour. So Genius Hour essentially is when you as a teacher, let's say your students came to art 5 days a week. Well, 4 days a week, you have a plan for them. And on the 5th day, they get to make or do whatever they want. In art, we might call that Free Friday or something like that. But read about the whole Genius Hour concept. It's to help create thinkers. And I think we're going to see if we have the patience to develop thinkers in our students, They're going to be more excited to create because they're going to understand the thinking process that goes into creating. I know some days I rarely get a chance to paint, but every now and then I'll get a day and I'm really looking forward to it. And I'll think, I don't know what I want to paint. I've been looking forward to painting all week. And I'm like, what am I going to paint? So there's a thought process that goes into being creative. It's not come in, sit down in the art classroom and be creative right now. That doesn't happen like that. And they're going to become more excited about the process and the progress. You know, I think the teacher that thought of this kitchen sink drama project was genius. Someone was probably throwing stuff in their kitchen sink and realized that you could take some cool pictures of that and it becomes an art project. And journaling, of course, is just something that's amazing to do. So how can we create thinkers in art education? You know, how they create a thinker in a 3rd grade class or a 7th grade math class or a high school biology class it has some similarities and some differences with how we create thinkers in art education. And some of the obvious ways are, of course, VTS. Okay, yep, we know VTS, visual thinking strategies. If you're not familiar with VTS, just Google visual thinking strategies. They have a website, I think it's vts.org or something like that, but they have a website. And it's a way of viewing art and asking questions that are really vague so that the teacher's not giving answers. The students are having to think about what they see. And teachers never even tell the students when they're wrong. It's just, what do you see? Why do you say that? We engage in more intellectual activity, problem solving. We give students time to consider and make decisions, and we use new art media and skills. And boy, have we been doing that the last couple months. Of course, we know about Bloom's revised taxonomy and critical thinking skills. I know you all know about these things, but if you don't, just write it down. And then, of course, choice. To me, choice was so important during these last couple of months because we didn't really know what supplies students had in the house, and it became difficult to buy things, and kids' parents weren't working and kids weren't working and money was tight. And so choice became and choice boards, the choice boards that you will see on our website. Bob's been working so great keeping our Google folder full of resources that teachers are sharing in our Facebook group. And there's a folder on choice boards that's loaded with choice boards that you can download and use. That's the beauty of this OAT K-12 service project is there's probably a couple years of curriculum plan for you. You just have to go download it and make it yours. But lastly, I want to say we've got to do more than these cognitive kinds of things. We've got to let them struggle. You know, I know when young teachers come into my class to be a student teacher, they just always wanted to run fixed problems with students. And I would teach them, no, stay back, let them struggle a little. That's how we learn. So we've got to give them time and we've got to allow the struggle. And I'm going to summarize this really by saying, I've already talked to you about this, that for remote instruction, I think a good plan for your elementary students is to do choice, type standards, same with your middle school students. With your high school students, wouldn't it be awesome to divide them into these collaborative groups, have them make a storyboard, a choice board, have them make choice boards, and then draw names out of a hat or something, and they all have to do a choice board that they didn't make, but have the students also help make the choice boards, because that creates thinkers. So I want to encourage you as you plan for fall, plan wonderful art projects, absolutely, but also think a little deeper. How can you get your students to think more? I think that's something good that might come out of remote instruction. I made a choice board that's just called Thinking Deeper. And it's a choice board that looks like a little bit like a bingo card. It's a table, and there's different assignments in each box. And students can choose, and you get to decide 2 a week. I made a choice board with 12 boxes, and they had to do 2 a week. So my one choice board lasted 6 weeks. but they get to choose what they do. And I would really encourage you to work those into what you're doing. Okay, so I really am so convinced that the secret to getting students to turn more in is that we have got to motivate them more. And I think we need to grab a cup of coffee and go sit outside on the patio or the back porch or the front porch. And we need to just sit and think for a while. How can I motivate my students? What cool things can I do? We don't all have to be rock star teachers. No, we don't have to be that. But just offering them some motivation and reward, maybe in different ways than we had to in our face-to-face classrooms, I think is really going to help us. That being said, I also have been thinking about how I am going to affect and teach the human beings that are going to be in my classes this fall, because we are dealing with a virus. It's been scary for a lot of kids. I have a 5-year-old grandson, and he just can't get over people wearing masks. And he's a pretty tough little boy, but it's scaring him to death. You know, everywhere he goes, people are wearing masks. And so I am really feel like we're going to have some students that are going to have more anxiety than ever. And you know, before the virus, school administrators in educational publications all over this country, school administrators were saying they saw more anxiety and trauma in their students than they'd seen in their entire careers. That was before the virus. So I think we have this one hat we wear of doing all these normal teacher structures, these normal things that we do that are normal parts of teaching. But then we're going to have all these human beings for fall that have been through a virus. And now we have all of this unrest going on in our country. And where does it go from here? And I know that social emotional learning and addressing the social emotional health and well-being of our students has got to be worked into our fall curriculum. And we aren't therapists. We don't even take an art therapy class in college. And that's something I'm really working on, is to try and get that changed. But in order to get that changed, we have to get NASAD to lower 3 hours of credit. So art schools can, it's complicated. But this is, I woke up about 4 o'clock this morning, had trouble sleeping last night, woke up about 4, and I came out to my desk and I made this graphic right here. I hadn't planned to make it. I am working on something that kind of has to do with this, but this morning this graphic just popped out. And so I think one of the things we've got to think about is hope, because we need to convey to our students, we've just got to convey to them some hopefulness. How can we build that into our curriculum? I know early on back in March, Bob made a post on our Facebook group that, you know, he wanted to hear what people were doing on the topic of hope. But research shows that people have got to have hope. You've got to have hope. You teachers sitting here right now, you've got to have hope. And your colleagues have got to have hope, and your students have got to have hope. So think of a unit or something you can do about hope. And I'm working on a curricular unit right now that I'm going to share for free when it's done, and it can be adapted to any age level of student. Then the other thing we're going to have to figure out and work into our curriculum is honesty. Because, you know, let's just be honest here. Some of us teach in a town where everybody looks like us, talks like us, and goes to the same church as us. And some of us teach in a very diverse community where everyone looks different. And some of us teach in very low SES areas. We come from a lot of variety as teachers. And so our students have experienced many different things. I'm just going to use myself. I know we're about out of time. My neighborhood where I live in Prosper, Texas, you wouldn't have a clue that anything was going on out in the world in my neighborhood. But I have friends that live in some condos in downtown Dallas, And for the, the last month and a half, they've seen a much different world where they live than I see 20 miles north of them. So I think we're going to have to have some honest conversations. And I'm going to tie these all three together here in a little bit. My friend, Dr. B. Stoney, who's a Black professor from K-State, and Dr. Socorro Herrera, who spoke at our conference today, who's a massively respected Hispanic professor. She says, and her and B both say that we have to not be afraid to have tough conversations. It's okay to talk about things that are tough in our classrooms. But if you're like me, I never wanted to talk about anything tough in my classroom. I learned a long time ago, just don't open yourself up for something that'll have to go to the principal's office, or you'll have to go talk to the principal about it, or, the principal will call you, or a parent will call the principal, or whatever. There are some protectionary things we do as teachers that are kind of normal for what we do. But it's okay to have difficult conversations in your class. And it's okay for you to not feel like you have to guide those difficult conversations. You can pose an art project that asks a question, and you can just let whatever comes out of students come out of them. Because the thing about honesty is what you need to be honest about, and what this person needs to be honest about, and what I need to be honest about at any given moment could all be totally different things. But by focusing on honesty, it lets the reality and the realness going on in a student's life be something that they can bring out without you saying, okay, what happened bad on your street this week? Okay, it's a big difference, because we know from Dr. Eisner and so many other arts-based researchers, we know, and because you're artists, we know that emotion comes out in the art students make. I'm going to close very quickly. The third thing we need to do is healing. And we're going to have to look for some ways to bring healing into our classroom. And that's going to be easier for us as art teachers than it's going to be for the other teachers. Because art, just by its very nature, gives students a way to express, as Eisner said, what can't be said. And so I want you to focus on hope and honesty and healing. And I don't mean that every curricular unit you teach this fall or this school year needs to have these threaded through them, but I think give students a way. And if you teach middle school and high school students, this might even be more important for you to give a voice to those students. I'm going to close with one last thing. I want to share something with you. Okay, see my glasses? Do you like them? Remember how we talked about motivation? It's funny how just some little crazy thing like these glasses. So some Maasai women from Africa who did all these beautiful, beaded necklaces. In the summer, I worked out in Santa Fe with the International Folk Art Market. Well, they're always looking for things to sell, but their art has to be traditional to get in a show. And the artists that came from Kenya, they actually just took old broken glasses and they weaved their beads around them. And you can see through it because there's no glass in it. And in the opening night parade, they were all wearing these glasses. And it was so cool. And there were probably 4,000 people down on the plaza in Santa Fe. Everybody wanted to know where they could get these glasses. And they only came with about 20 pair. Well, the next year they came with about 1,000 pairs. They sold all of them. So, this is an example to me of like the found object projects. Like, think of unique things you can do because those things are catching. And I want to read this to you because I think this is a good way to close. I'm getting ready. I've heard about this book called The Art of Gathering by Priya Parker. How we meet and why it matters. How we meet and why it matters. And I'm going to read this from the viewpoint of a teacher, but I want to read this paragraph to you. In The Art of Gathering, Priya Parker argues that the gatherings in our lives, so let's say our classrooms, remote classrooms, face-to-face classrooms, the gatherings in our lives are lackluster, and unproductive, which they don't have to be. We rely too much on routine and the conventions of gatherings when we should focus on distinctiveness and the people involved. At a time when coming together is more important than ever, Parker sets forth a human-centered approach to gathering that will help everyone create meaningful, memorable experiences, large and small, for work and play. So, as you get ready for fall, I'm going to challenge you to do a few things. The first thing is very high tech, very 21st century, you know, very, very complicated. I just want you to try to fall in love with teaching again. I want you to get out of those patterns that you have established, because that's the kind of society we were before the virus. I want you to remember back when you wanted to be a teacher, and remember back when you had your first classroom, and remember back when you had maybe the first cool thing that ever happened as a teacher. Try to fall in love with teaching again, and then infuse that with the creativity that only an art teacher can. And then I want you to get the nuts and bolts figured out. Your curriculum, your communication, get all that figured out. Challenge those students with intrinsic motivation and self-efficacy. And then wrap your virtual arms around all the rest of them. And let them struggle. Give them choices. Let them think. Let them work for it a little bit. And don't feel like you failed when they aren't turning in perfectly wonderful, you know, art projects and work that you think they should be. It's okay, because it was the learning process that maybe mattered the most. And then try to infuse what you do this fall. Try to infuse some kind of theme, even if it's a class opener, if it's a journal activity. How can you weave hope and honesty and healing into what you do with students this fall? I am someone that likes my own company. I've never minded being alone. And I've used myself for a gauge these last couple of months, because I was getting real tired of being alone. And I know if I'm getting tired of being alone, then I know that most people are probably having a little more difficult time with it than me, because I've never really minded my own company. So I just want to encourage you. I'm kind of excited about being a teacher right now. That's probably the most bizarre thing I could possibly say to you. But I've learned how to do all kinds of new things. And I have forced myself to learn some new things. And this morning I woke up, it's been on my mind for a few days, and I've been having a lot of conversations about healing with people and bringing social emotional learning into our classroom. But this morning I woke up and I said, it's hope. It's offering our students hope. It's giving them a space to be honest and share what's going on in their minds and their hearts and their lives. And then it's giving them a place to heal. And I think that's going to help us all get through the fall. So that's all I've got. I didn't leave you much time for questions. Sorry, Bob.
Dr. Harlow, no worries at all. Your message was one of hope, honesty, and healing. And several of the messages on that have been included is this idea of falling back in love with teaching again. And I think that's a excellent place for us to leave off. Now, Dr. Harlow, you and I both spent the last 2 days busy typing away. So we want to, first of all, thank you for joining us tonight. We appreciate your message. I believe Jody is going to come on board, maybe, or Josie, to do some final things and maybe offer up some time to continue if people do want to stay on. But Dr. Harlow, we're going to let you take off, because it's been a long couple of days for us.
It has. And check out this book. I think it is going to be a really good book for teachers, The Art of Gathering. All right. Thank you so much.
Dr. Harlow, who is that by again? I'm sorry. Who's the author?
The first name is Priya, Priya. Yep. Last name Parker. Thank you, Nebraska. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Harlow. Jody, Josie, what would you like to offer?
Well, we wanted to offer time for anyone to ask questions or share insights that might have come up while you were listening to Dr. Harlow, or connections that you might have made to what she's saying, to things that you've learned in your own districts or in your own research, or just in your own heart as you're looking how to forge a path forward in what we're all in love with doing.
Well, I appreciated her 5 pieces about the thinking learner, you know, those 5 about being excited. And I keep thinking, if we can do an awesome job, an incredible job of teaching children remotely, how powerful is that going to be when we return back to our classrooms? I mean, I think our instruction is going to be incredibly stronger, just because we're going to be so excited to be back with kids. But we're going to be through some really, you know, continue to be through some difficult pieces trying to do this online. When we're back face to face, wow, we're going to be able to move mountains, I think. So I'm really excited about, I'm excited about her excited list. So look forward to trying to utilize those.
Mm-hmm.
I liked the just the ideas of sharing artwork publicly, either through, like, I thought it was neat, the principal's newsletter, like how cool would that be to have a student's work highlighted in there. So if I think finding ways to do that is really will be really great too, or even like creating some sort of gallery that can be shared with the other kids, can see the work that's coming in.
Josie, does your school have a Facebook page?
Yeah.
I put stuff on there all the time. I mean, I'm fortunate enough that I'm one of the people that administers the page, so I can put things on there at will. But maybe there's a format for where you could even submit things that could be highlighted.
Yeah, totally. Like creating a, like I will have different things happening in the classroom, or like if students' work is in a contest, that always gets up there. But I think, yeah, some sort of programming that can, or contacting a newspaper, that'd be super cool.
Mm-hmm.
I learned about a program today. I guess it's free, and we obviously don't have it in the district or have it approved yet. I think it was called Art Steps, and it was from SCAD, Savannah College of Art and Design, and they showed us a demo today where you put in the student work, and it can be video work, it can be 2D work, it can be 3D work, and it puts it into an actual gallery setting, and you can take a virtual tour, or you can plan a virtual tour. And it was pretty amazing to just see this example of student work and student videos and student 3D sculpture in what looked like a professional gallery online.
That's cool.
I think creating those spaces also internally to your classroom, like Art Steps and Facebook, they're about this public dialogue that's also about advocacy and PR and marketing, but the tools that you use when you're constructing an asynchronous or synchronous course that are just for the kids. So are there any platforms that people feel they're very fond of that function for that? I like Seesaw because I have a lot of multilingual students, and it's a really easy platform for the learning curve acquisition, and it has a social media aspect to it. You can have the students post work just to you and you grade it, or you can have them post it, you make it public to the one class, and they can respond to each other just like you would respond on Facebook, but it's within the confines of that app. So that's one that I used before COVID in my class, and the students, they enjoy that platform quite a bit. But I just learned about one today called Buncee, Buncee. I'm not familiar with it. I'm taking an online teaching and learning class to the University of Nebraska. So I'm seeing what all these districts are doing. Like every district is using different apps and modalities. So I'm just curious, since we have a diverse group here that's from different parts of the country, different school districts, if there's any apps or platforms that are kind of internal to a classroom that people are using.
Well, we use a Flipgrid.
Okay, yep.
A Flipgrid, kind of the same way you're talking with your, but
Seesaw.
with Seesaw,
Yeah.
yeah, that ability to do the little videos. and pull things in. We're all moving to Canvas this year, so I'm kind of looking at that, and we're in Microsoft Shop. The only thing I worry about those Bitmoji things is that they all seem to be, it seems to be Google for sure. And I'm wondering if my ITC will be okay with that. So that's one thing. I'm like, I really would like to pull that in because that was just amazing today to see that.
You can screenshot them and have them be like a still image. And put it into whatever platform you're delivering multimodal content through. I just went through this last night with my 17-year-old for TikTok because I do not have one, but I will be making TikTok videos. And yes, I will, wearing my instructional support hats, right? And embedding those TikTok videos at the end of ed puzzles when they get all their work done, or if they do what they're supposed to. Because I can't have a TikTok in OPS. They don't, but I can just download the MPEG-4. And usually people come to my classroom because they want to know what is Crazy Boyer going to do today, right? So I have to replicate that somehow. And so that's, you know, I'm learning here. I also have a princess hat that I wore today when I taught origami to some after-school program kids.
Because Jody, you are so princess-like.
I am not. I am.
I love
so
it.
Not.
Good for you. Love it. That's a great hat.
But I just adored when Dr. Harlow brought out those glasses because, you know, I do think that, you know, that there's this human intimacy that we miss with online instruction. And there's actually research. I have a whole bunch of research articles that if you would love to bore yourself until 2 a.m. talking about the need for social interaction and caring. And there's actually researchers out there doing studies on how to integrate this into distance learning, mostly for higher ed. You know, a lot of the data is coming out of higher ed because that's a big economic revenue stream for those universities. But now we're all trying to do it K-12, so I don't know if anybody else.
Yeah, I feel like one of the biggest challenges will be that looking like what? Oh, sorry, distracted.
Yes, sorry.
Because like I don't know what I don't know what it's gonna look like in the fall, but last year, you know, like I just had to put out our activities. I didn't get to interact with my kids at all. So like, I'm just curious, like if that will be the same thing, and if that is like the interaction between my kids to like, because they inspire each other so much, how that will pan out. And then the social emotional component. But yeah, I don't know.
That the students missing each other was what I was trying to say when she was still on with us. And I think it kind of got buzzed right over because it had nothing to do with curriculum, and that's what we were talking about then. But yeah, that it was important to have those weekly class meetings just so they could see each other again. And we had to have a birthday party for the classmate, and you know,
Rebecca, was that in your high school with your high school kids where you did the birthday part where they saw each other? You're just at high school, right?
I had 7 through 12.
7 through, yeah.
We were required in our school to have face-to-face contact at least once a week with our classes.
That is nice.
Well, Rebecca, you'll be happy to know that a lot of the research and data is focused on that intuitive knowing that you're talking about, them wanting to be together. So a lot of the higher ed distance learning research is focused on and making that happen and capitalizing on that for motivation and engagement. And I think that if we're going to be here for a long time like this, K-12 is going to have to let go a little bit of that control that it has about safety, you know, safety moms kind of situation, and create these enclosed and safe from the public online spaces, you know, because the kids need it. You know, there's magic between kids. There's magic, and they need that magic, you know, and if they don't have that magic, how are they supposed to develop effectively, even cognitively, you know?
And a lot of them were home alone. Like their parents left to work. So imagine being a junior high kid and you're alone for maybe 10 hours that day. I've got to get on. I've got to talk to somebody. They were my motivated people because they were lonely. I'll do anything you want, art teacher. Just make sure you're there next week so I could talk to you again. They did everything because they wanted to talk. They wanted to interact.
Well, and I think your comments, Rebecca, are right on with what Dr. Harlow was saying, right? It's that humanization that we so desire and need. And how do we humanize when we're looking at screens all day with each other? And I think that's a huge challenge. So I think we just continue to offer those opportunities. Many of us are chuckling because the chat over here has just got all kinds of interesting conversations. It's really humanizing you all as I'm reading it. So
Humanizing you all.
Does anyone have any other curriculum related insights, comments, or questions? No?
No.
Well, I think this has been really informative and enriching and helpful as I look into the vast unknown of 6 weeks from now. I don't know if anyone else feels that way. But we have recorded it and it will be available some way in the next couple of weeks. We have the recordings. We're not quite sure how we're going to push them out yet. But our next session is Wednesday, July 29th with Dr. Ferrier Pearson, who spoke at our fall conference. And she's going to be speaking with us about equity and culturally responsive teaching in the classroom. And I just finished a class with her on this topic, and she's got so many insights and a vast amount of expertise on culturally responsive teaching. So I'm really looking forward to what she's going to share with us. And with that, I think I'm going to stop the recording.